He is a former NCAA heavyweight division amateur wrestler, with being awarded in 2016 and 2017, I believe, the SoCon Wrestler of the Year. We're talking a man to this day that is still got the 4th most career wins for App State. We're talking absolute pinnacle of amateur wrestling here. Went on to have his time in NXT, and now he's here with us Inside the Ropes to talk about that time. It's none other than Denzel Dejournette. Denzel, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm not too bad. The sun's just setting here in Scotland. It's 5 o'clock, which means it's nighttime now. We don't get much sun, so looking forward to sitting down to chat about you. Like we said, you've got a very accomplished amateur wrestling career. Was reading up on you ahead of this sort of interview, looking at sort of your accomplishments and how well you did, and learned a lot about that. So I'm excited to pick your brain about sort of that transition, as well as your time in NXT and what's to come next, because as you said, there's power in the name Denzel Dejournette. So I think it makes sense. Let's start. Talk to me a little bit about amateur wrestling. We said there, I think it's 112 to 37 overall ranking across sort of 4 years. How did you kind of find your way into amateur wrestling? And do you think it's something that helped you when you then made that transition into professional wrestling?
Yes. So I got into amateur wrestling when I was in high school. I originally wanted to play football, and they said to play football, you have to either play basketball or wrestle. Well, I didn't make the basketball teams. Amateur wrestling was not my first choice. It was actually kind of like, even though they lied about it, like there was a lot of people that ended up playing football the next year that did not wrestle or play football. But so that's how I ended up getting into it, and I was terrible at it, and I was going to quit my sophomore year. Because my freshman year, I was like 5-9 on varsity. I never won a JV match. I was 5-9 on varsity only because I had 3 forfeits. So I really only won 2. So for 3 of those matches, I really just had to go out there and get my hand raised. So the next year I was like, I think I'm gonna quit. Like I was in practice. I was like, I don't know if I like this too much. But then I told myself, if I beat this guy that used to like, he was more developed than I was. He's one of those guys that had a full beard in like 7th grade. So he had more testosterone than all of us. I remember I told myself, if I beat him in this live go that we have, then I'm going to stick with it. And I waxed him. Like I destroyed him. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll stick with it. And then I had a pretty good year. And then each year I've gotten better and better.
So I was looking in, you seem to have worked with sort of across your career in amateur wrestling and in going into professional wrestling. You seem to have worked with some sort of great names. Like we look at the likes of John Mark Bentley during your time at App State, and then obviously William Regal, Triple H, all the guys at the PC. Who's kind of been that sort of inspiring sort of role model or leader for you sort of throughout your life that's kind of really helped shape sort of your mindset and your positivity to help get you where you are today?
From the PC or just
all over?
I would say, so when I was in college, like high school and college, I used to watch a lot of like motivational videos. Like I've always liked that type of stuff. So I was a huge Les Brown fan.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he was funny, he was peppy, he was positive. So that was somebody that I really like. I think Coach Bentley instilled mental toughness, like as time went on, like to how to be mentally tough. And then when there's adversity, that was like his favorite word. So I think he helped shape that. And at the PC or the CWC, I would say it was, I like Norman Smiley a lot. He was very positive. He was very honest about how the wrestling business is. And he was hilarious. Well, not was, he is hilarious.
So we see a lot of sort of fans looking from the outside into the PC and hearing about different classes, Smiley's class or Terry Taylor's class. What for you was kind of your experience in the PC? Was there a particular class, or you mentioned Smiley, someone in particular you really like learning from, and sort of how beneficial do you think the sort of training you had there was?
I think the training there was very beneficial. Like they taught you the basics. So they gave you, because that's where I started. I started there. Yeah. So they give you a solid foundation. So I never was in Terry's class, but I would like drop in and kind of watch. And Terry was all about the psychology and like I remember there was a lot of people that always said, like, sometimes I don't completely agree with Terry, but he has really great points. And if you do listen to him and talking about how to get the crowd in your hand and don't beg for reactions and things like that, he makes a lot of sense. Like, he really does. I think, he's still like old school. So, certain things that he has, like, that I still think will work, but you've got to compete with people that are doing these moves. So finding that nice balance of what he's saying, of like, it's not about the moves. And I agree with that. But also when people are kind of up in the level, I don't think we can just do headlock story unless you're like Randy Orton. That's because he's mastered getting the crowd in his hands.
So we've seen a lot of names in the WWE, AEW, all over wrestling that have kind of made that transition from amateur wrestling to pro wrestling. And you get some guys who were wrestling fans, some guys that weren't. What sort of, were you someone that grew up watching wrestling? Were you sort of interested in the industry before you made the jump? And also, how did that sort of process of moving from college to the PC work? Were you sort of headhunted? Was there someone in particular that came to sort of make the pitch to you per se?
Yeah, so growing up, I watched it, but I'm not going to say that I was like a super avid fan. I did know, but I will say that I did know like the big names. Like, I knew everybody knows John Cena, The Rock, Stone Cold. I knew who DX was. So I Shelton Benjamin. Like, I knew like a lot of the bigger names that were doing their thing at the time. But I think when I got around middle school, because I remember the last game that I had for WWE, because I had the Nintendo 64. I think it was WrestleMania 2000. I think I've had all the Nintendo 64 games, but the last video game that I had was SmackDown versus Raw 2008 with Bobby Lashley. And I remember I got it because I was like, man, this is a specimen of a man. I would look like this guy. So I remember getting the game and always playing with Bobby Lashley. So that was a cool moment for me when I actually got to wrestling. But making that jump, the person who made the pitch to me was Jay Briscoe. I was at a tournament in California, and it was funny because it's like my breakout year. Yeah. But he didn't. It was like it's like the first or second tournament. So, I remember I won in I want to say the quarterfinals, and I was walking through like, I think it's called like the concourse area, and he said, "Hey, are you the guy that wrestled for App State?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Did you just wrestle?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, so he started talking and he pulled out his card and I saw WWE on the card. He said, "Hey, my name is Jerry Briscoe." He said, "Give me a call after you're All-American. I can change your life forever." So I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. And then moving from college to the PC, it was a little different. I think it wasn't really as different because I think, the difference was I moved from an hour and a half away from home to college by car to an hour and a half by flight. So it was very interesting to say the least, but I've always kind of been an independent guy. So like, it wasn't like when I moved here, it was, I was really homesick or anything. I was more like, mind over matter, out of sight, out of mind. Like I still, thought about my family and things like that, but I think I was focused on the task at hand.
So I think an interesting one for me is when we look at sort of the PC class you came in at, you had the likes of Keith Lee, Io Shirai, Deonna Purrazzo coming in. What was that sort of experience like with the PC class? Do you guys sort of stick together and sort of train as a group? And if so, what was it like being sort of a fresh sort of canvas in the wrestling industry, training with someone like Keith Lee, for example, who, has been on the independent scene for sort of 10, 15 years? Was he offering you advice and giving you a bit of guidance, or was that kind of, I'm not going to interfere with your training, I'll let you do your own thing sort of vibe?
Yeah, people like Keith Lee is like my brother. He's like my big brother. He was always hands-on with me. Like if I have any questions, he wasn't like ever standoffish. Like every time I see him, you gotta do the handshake and wrestling.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're going to get the fist bump. Every time he pulls me in for a hug, and he's pretty strong. So, ain't no need in fighting it, but because sometimes, I think he might be busy. Hey, what's going on, Keith? And like every time he's going to stop what he's doing, like, hey man, and give me a hug. And that's a warm feeling. But to answer your question in whole, like we started off together, like Coach Brookside was always, like for a while, like when you first, well, actually still now, when you first start off, you're in his class. But after like maybe a week or a month, they start to go off to their own classes, because Brookside is usually like the basics class, like how to do a headlock, a provide a wrist lock, a chin lock, well, anything but a chin lock. He hates that hold, but because everybody does it. But just the basics. So we worked together for like a week or to a month. I can't remember, but it was a short period of time. And they went on to their classes. And me and Stacy, because Stacy Irvin Jr. was the other guy that came fresh from his college background or wherever he came from. And so me and him was in that class. And I think there were like, well, we actually had a couple more people there's been a while, so they haven't been a while, but but those people, like I remember EO was in the class, Deanna, MJG, they moved them to different classes, and it was still a fun experience. And I think we did kind of stick together a little bit, and then as time went on, they started to have successes of their own because they were bigger stars and they were on TV, so they kind of had their own schedule. We all kind of broke up in a sense.
One thing I've always found interesting, and you see it feels like it's sort of on a situation by situation basis and how people sort of respond to it. And, we've only been chatting for a little bit, but I think it's very clear that you have a sort of respect for the wrestling industry and you came in with that respect, mentioned the handshakes and everything like that. Do you ever feel like there's a stigma around sort of out of college athletes that go into the PC? Have you ever found anyone maybe slightly standoffish or someone who's a little bit like, I worked on independence for 20 years to get here and you've just walked in? Was there any sort of that vibe at all, or was it always a very supportive, if you need a hand, I'm here sort of thing?
Yeah, I think people are always, if you need a hand, I'm here. Like I remember coming in and thinking, like hearing people say that, hey, you might, people might look at you, like they were just giving me like, so people from my class, I remember like, there were certain people from my class that were on the indies and said there's going to be certain people that look at you because you're new and you're fresh meat and all that stuff. And there's like a proverbial spot that everybody is trying to go for. But honestly, when I got here, it didn't feel like that. Maybe they didn't feel threatened, and honestly, they shouldn't. If you're good at what you do, I don't think you should feel threatened. You should help people out because I think there's enough room for everybody, especially with all the shows that we have. All the shows that WWE had. So I thought that was going to be the case, but it wasn't. It was, everybody was welcoming. Everybody was willing to help. They were very patient because when I first started, I'm not going to lie, I had trouble when we had longer matches trying to like memorize everything.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, even it was like, well, I ain't even gonna say longer matches, 6 to 8 minutes. I might forget like a small little part and I might blank out and stuff like that. And I've had some pros that helped me through it. So everybody, in my opinion and in my experience, were very helpful.
You shared the ring in NXT with some real veteran names, especially of NXT. Tommaso Ciampa jumps to mind. And so you were there at that period just before we now transitioned to NXT 2.0 with a lot of fresh faces, and you were kind of there with sort of the last guard of the original sort of NXT lot. Was there anyone backstage in the locker room that really stands out to you looking back as like the locker room leader, the sort of guy that was there making sure everyone was looked after, giving people advice, maybe laying down the law when it needed to be laid down? Is there anyone that jumps out to you when I talk about those sort of things?
I think the Forgotten Sons were like that. Well, Cutler and Blake. Who else? I will say Damian Priest when he first got in, and I think I ain't gonna say learning the ropes because he knew how to wrestle, but when he first came in, I think he didn't really want to step on any toes, and then he got that big push, and I think people realized how good he is and all that stuff, and then he kind of stepped into a locker room leader position, like always talking to people, and when we have meetings, sometimes he would lead the meetings. Adam Cole, I believe, was my favorite. Like he it wasn't like he would like give speeches and stuff in the locker room, but one thing that I did like about him is that he is completely different from his character.
Oh, really?
Admire who he is 100 times more, because I remember I went on a road loop or when they go like national on the shows, and I had to room with him, and I remember like not dreading it, but being kind of anxious when I found out I had to room with him, because I'm like, well, for one thing, I'm the rookie. And he's like the top guy. I think this was after he just lost the title. So I was like, this is gonna be awkward. Like, what are we gonna talk about? Is he gonna be like stuck up? And no, he was the complete opposite. He was very welcoming. He was very cool. He was very nice. If I had questions, he'll message me back and give me like different tools. And I think that was one of the things that stood out because, like I said, he's 100% different. I mean, I'm sure that's part of who his character is in him, but he's super nice. He's not the arrogant guy that honestly, he has the room to be arrogant if he wanted to, like from what he's accomplished and what he did for every brand that he's been on. So that was the guy that really stuck out to me.
It's interesting you mentioned, I think in particular, the Forgotten Sons stand out to me. And I think it really hits on the idea that, what people see from the guys in the ring and on camera is so different to maybe the way they are backstage and in the locker room. And what makes me wonder is there anyone in particular that you really think is like appreciated by the locker room but isn't appreciated by the fans at home, like maybe someone that doesn't get an opportunity or didn't get an opportunity while you were there to show how good they are, or they're working the hardest in the gym and they're training extra all the time, and you're on social media or you see people speaking and nobody really sees how much effort they're putting in?
I would say some of those guys were the ones that ended up getting released. So like I would throw myself in that category. I was known to work. I would drop into 2 classes and 3 classes. This is not me trying to put myself over, but I guess I am putting myself over. EJ and Duca, I think he was one of those guys. He worked out. We did extra stuff. But back then, the system was it was a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, guys like me and him, I'm trying to think because it's not coming to me like those are fresh because for one thing, me and him are friends, and another thing, like we were in the same groups a lot. But I think now once they kind of got rid of a lot of people, I think the people that were getting overlooked are finally starting to get, like, everybody's starting to get an opportunity. So I think that's a cool thing.
You mentioned the releases. You were released in sort of that very strange 12 to 18 months where we saw lots of names from PC recruits that hadn't debuted yet to Bray Wyatt, former world champions, being released. Did that have an impact on the atmosphere backstage at all? Were people kind of slightly more nervous or on edge or maybe more fired up to kind of prove that they should be here? Or was it something that the guys in the back just didn't really pay too much attention to?
I think it was a little bit of both. Like, I think people were nervous and anxious about it because, like you say Bray Wyatt, you see Braun Strowman. I think because Braun was first. Once we saw Braun, I remember everybody was like nobody's safe. Like when Braun was on TV, he was just on WrestleMania. Like it was like, okay, no one's safe. And then even like the whole Aleister Black thing where they started to do vignettes for him to push him forward, and then next thing you know, he was gone that next week or two or whatever. And but also fire people up because it's like, okay, is the sense of nobody's safe, I better get my stuff together, or it's it's time to push it because on the other side of that coin, nobody is safe, so you better make yourself valuable real quick or you're out the door.
We mentioned obviously yourself being released, and I'm interested in what the future holds for Denzel Dejournette, because I'm hoping this is correct because I had a look and double checked it, but I believe your college major was pharmacy with business. Is that correct?
So that's when I first came in. My sister was a pharmacist and I tried to do it for the money. Organic chemistry, and that's the weed out class, and it weeded me right out. But so I actually graduated, and then they just never changed it. Like that was when I first came in, so they never changed the major and all that. So, but my major was exercise science pre-professional undergrad, and then I got my master's in exercise science with a concentration in strength and conditioning.
So you're clearly a very intelligent man. You've got that degree and that career option there. Is that maybe something that you're looking at a little bit more now, or are you kind of still fully on the I'm going to get back to wrestling. I'm going to show what I can do wherever it is, and then I'm going to come back bigger and better. Where's kind of your mindset at just now with that?
I'm going to continue to do this journey and come back bigger and better, because it was just like, I never really had a chance to show who I was. And it's not just me, you know, there's a lot of people that feel that way. So, you know, the Drew McIntyre story was very inspiring to me when he was supposed to be his fall from grace was a lot bigger than mine. You know, I've had a couple TV matches. So it's like, okay, there's somebody who went through worse than you and came back, and look at him now. So it's one of those things that like inspired me, because, you know, why not me? He's human just like I am. He's slightly taller. But, you know, and been wrestling longer, but at the end of the day, like he's experienced his failures and he kept pushing, and there's millions of stories like mine that's similar. So why not keep pushing?
I think that's the perfect mindset to have, because like you said, we've seen it before from Drew, we've seen it with a lot of people where they come back and, you know, they take themselves to the next level. We've seen, you mentioned your friend there, EJ and Duca, dominated an MLW in the Battle Riot when he came in. Maybe something you'd be interested in going and working with him over there, or is there a company in mind that you're kind of hoping to reach out, or are you just kind of anywhere and everywhere just now?
I think right now it's just anywhere and everywhere, just trying to get some exposure, because there's so many people out there. And, you know, I thought, because a lot of people say, yeah, you know, you were in WWE, everybody's going to be trying to pick you up. But no, there's a lot of really good people out there also that's been fighting for a spot. So unless you were like a bigger name, like on the indies, coming from WWE and kind of getting back, picking up where you left off, I think it's a little different. So I have to go anywhere and everywhere and try to get some exposure, and then, but hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm worth.
Fantastic. One thing that really interests me, you mentioned when you talked about the fantastic SmackDown versus Raw 2008, which I think is without a doubt one of the best wrestling games. I'm a big GM mode fan from when I was younger. That was always my play as ECW. Try and get Triple H, Shawn Michaels, ECW, sure. But you mentioned Bobby Lashley, and you know, you had those couple matches on Raw and SmackDown against the likes of him and Seth Rollins. What was it like sort of backstage at those shows, coming in through Gorilla and everything? And how different was that to then the way that NXT is backstage? Were you a little bit more on edge, and, you know, were you sat there going, that's Vince McMahon, I better be careful? Or was it much of the same?
Honestly, it was much of the same, because I knew that those matches weren't about me. So as long as I can make them look good, and honestly, like I believe in my abilities, and also the fact that I'm in there with like these vets who I think all of them at some point were champion.
Yeah.
So I was like, there's no way this can mess up. Like, even if I wanted to go out of my way to try to mess this up, they're so that they won't, like, it won't mess up. So that took a lot of the edge off. And going backstage and seeing Vince McMahon, it was cool, because it was kind of like, he's a weird mystic creature. Like, you always hear about him, but you never, well, like, especially NXT, you always hear about him, but you never see him. Vince don't like this. Vince loves this. Vince says this. It's like, you don't see him, but you hear him. And it kind of created some mystique about him, which I thought was cool. But seeing him, you know, he gave me the patented fist bump, you know, good job. So it was a very cool experience, but I don't think it was any different. I think the only thing that made it a little bit different than NXT is because when it was at the Thunderdome, it was like, when you go back to the back, everybody's kind of working on their match or whatever and doing their thing, because they were doing a lot of matches at one time when I was doing it. But it was just Vince and Paul Heyman and I think maybe Jason Ayers. And that was it. But NXT, when you go back there, it's like a bunch of people. It's like all the producers. Because it's usually it's the live show, so they're all back there. You know, oh, good job, all that. Get maybe like a couple critiques, you know, if they have the time, and so it's a little bit different, but also the circumstances are different.
So before we wrap up, we like to end on the same little trio of questions here. We always like to start by asking, what is one thing about the wrestling industry or backstage at the WWE or the locker room or the day-to-day about wrestling that you just think that fans have no idea about this, or fans have got this bit wrong and don't understand it, or what do you think would surprise people the most about the industry?
I think, I think this would surprise them. I don't know how much fans really know these days, but I think about the backstage thing is how professional and how good and smart that these wrestlers are, because with the schedule being, especially during the COVID time, like during COVID time, there'd be times that they had a whole show written out, but then, somebody might have caught COVID. So now they had to restructure the show. And honestly, I mean, some people are like, hey, where'd this person go? Where did this person go? There's in the storyline, they picked up on it. But the fact that like you might get the test that morning, or how like sometimes I've heard stories about how the show had to be like rewritten as the doors were opening. And it's like a 3-hour show. And it's like, and the fact that people are able to adapt, and you can't tell, like, because that's a very stressful situation, I believe. But everybody goes out there and they do their thing, and everybody's like, anything can really change at the drop of a dime. And I think it happens here in the wrestling business more often than not. And the way that everybody adjusts and adapts is very, to me, it surprised me. Like growing up as a fan, I used to just think, for one thing, I used to be one of those guys that when you get to a certain age and people tell you, oh, it's fake, it's fake. And like, it don't take much to be a wrestler because the guys were so good that they made it look easy. Yeah, no, it's not easy. So, and thinking that it's super organized all the time, and it's not. Sometimes things are happening, things will change, and the people's ability to adapt to make it work and make it seem like seamless and effortless, man, that's one of the things that I think would surprise people.
Love that. Right. So the next one we like to ask is, we talked about, and I think you're going to be a great person to ask about this because you talked a lot about sort of mental toughness and listening to sort of motivational speakers when you were younger. What is your sort of go-to motto or piece of advice in your head whenever the going gets tough, when you got released, or when, you're struggling with anything at home? What's that message in your head that you can tell yourself to kind of refocus, calm yourself down, and help yourself sort of overcome everything?
Yeah, so actually my favorite quote ever, I heard it maybe last year or 2 years ago. And it's always going to stick with me, I believe. But my dad once told me, he was like, you got to go through life to get through life. And I was like, it sounds so simple, but it's so true.
I think, yeah, that's one of those, like people always talk about these really long intertwining quotes, but it's always those nice, short, snappy pundit ones that they stick with you. And I think that's a great one. So to finish off, we do this all the time. It's a good bit of fun. We're just going to do some rapid fire word association. I've got some names here from your time in the WWE. We're just going to talk a little bit about, we're just going to say the names, one word answer, first things that comes to mind, no questions asked.
Okay.
So Triple H.
Boss.
Tommaso Ciampa.
Aggressive.
John Mark Bentley.
Intense.
Vince McMahon.
Mystic.
William Regal.
Noble.
NXT.
It's 2 words, so
you can go for it.
Okay, black and gold.
Desmond Troy.
Conqueror.
Cameron Grimes.
Wacky.
NXT 2.0.
Exciting.
And finally, Denzel Dejournette.
Overcomer.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed that. It's been a nice chat. I learned quite a lot about you, about sort of the way things have worked. And it's really exciting to see sort of the positive mentality you've kept through everything. And I'm really excited to see what you can do with the opportunities you're given and to build yourself back up, because I think you've clearly shown that you've got the knowledge and mental state to do that. Before I let you go, anything you want to plug, anywhere people can follow you, and anything any merch, anything like that, now's your opportunity to plug everything.
So Twitter, Cam Jackson, CamJaxson. Instagram, Lights Cam Jackson. So lights like turn on, turn off a light, LIGHTS, Cam CAM, Jackson JAXSON. And yeah, that's pretty much it right now. I'm trying to get merch and stuff like that, but I'm having trouble with getting the design made for the from the graphic designer.
Well, there you had it, guys. Make sure and you head over there and drop Denzel a follow, because he's been nice enough to do this for us. And you know, he's a lovely guy. You heard it there. You just the way he speaks, the way he talks about himself in the industry, definitely worth following it, because you never know, in a year or two it might be one of the most talked about names in the wrestling industry. As always, when said the ropes, make sure to subscribe. Head over to ihrwrestling.com if you would prefer to read these stories individually, or if you want to share them about, that's all there. And you can follow me on Twitter at LiamAStewart, or at Instagram on at LiamALXStewart. But other than that, thank you very much for listening, guys. And as always, please remember to be good people.